the DAWbench Radio Show, the official podcast of DAWbench.com.
Welcome to the DAWbench Radio Show. I am your host, Curigliano of AAVIM Technology in Melbourne, Australia, and I'm joined again today, co-hosting by Pete Brown of Microsoft in Maryland in the United States. Pete, how you going, mate?
Good, Vin. How are you doing?
I'm good for, just after 5 a.m. on a Friday morning here in Melbourne.
It's early.
Yeah, but 5 a.m. and I've been awake for tossing and turning for 2 hours, so...
We appreciate the sacrifices you make for the podcast, Vin.
It's okay, mate. I never really sleep anyway. Too many tabs open in the brain. Now, today we are joined by a special guest, and that is Claes Johanson of Bitwig, who are a very highly respected, award-winning DAW developer who are quite unique in the sense that the DAW is cross-platform, but not only on Windows and OS X, but also on Linux. And right. Claes is coming in from Berlin in Germany. Welcome, Claes.
Thank you, Vin. We're happy to be here. And good morning. Good afternoon, Pete.
And good evening for you, yeah?
Yes.
You're most welcome, Claes, and thank you very much for joining us on the show today. I think I'm going to kick off the show with what has become tradition, but it's going to be a little bit different today in the sense that with all my guests, I usually have some historical interaction. Sometimes we go back 10, 20 years or so. Now, with yourself and your company, I haven't had any personal interaction past the fact that I've been aware of the program. I have played with it over the years. I've been monitoring the development of it, but we haven't actually had any interaction ourselves. But yourself and Pete have had a bit of history, from my understanding. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So Claes and I met first. Claes, was it at NAMM that we met, or I'm trying to think?
I think it was NAMM, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was NAMM. And I was going around handing Microsoft business cards around to people saying like, hey, we're still out here listening to folks.
We're here.
We're here.
We exist.
And Claes and I had a really good discussion, showed me some cool stuff on Bitwig. And I don't remember if that was the year that you had it on the Surface Studio in there, or if that came later. But I just remember being really impressed with the software I saw in the booth at the time.
Yeah, maybe it was. I don't know. That was probably 2017 when we did that, wasn't it?
Yeah, somewhere around there. But you guys always had like a really... each year, I think you added more stuff to your booth at NAMM, where eventually it got into modular bits and everything else. So there was always something new and exciting to check out over there.
Yeah.
But plus, the UI was always just gorgeous anyway. So that's really what pulled me over there. Claes, as interesting as you are, it was really the beautiful UI of the application that drew me into your booth.
Well, of course.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, I think what would be interesting would be, and this is towards Claes, what would be interesting is your personal history with music and technology, how you actually got into coding, and your eventual journey to co-founding Bitwig. So if you can give us an overview on that would be awesome.
Yeah, sure. Growing up, I was sort of always a bit interested in music. When I went to school, I wanted to play piano, but I was too young to start it. So I started with clarinet and hated it because it hurts so much when you play, in the mouth. Actually, now I can play it quite easily because I have more pressure,
Yep.
With better air pressure. But back then it was like, it's just painful.
Yes, yeah.
But anyway, at the same time, then I also started getting into computers we had an Amiga at home. I think how old was, maybe I was 9 at the time or so. And I just loved messing around with different things there. And one of them was, of course, sound. And like started messing with trackers. I think, was it, I don't remember which one of the trackers. Yeah, but then one of the normal ones. And got like the sampler card. And eventually, like a MIDI interface. Also had a program called Music X where I could sequence MIDI, but we just had a kind of like shitty Yamaha home keyboard that was like based on FM synthesis, but not the exciting kind where you can actually program anything, but just like a bunch of presets. So, but anyway,
those trackers are coming back in now. Like,
yeah,
you're starting to see. Yeah,
I did a whole show on them. Yeah, yep. Sorry.
Oh, right, that's right.
yeah.
But taught me the basics. But eventually, then we got a PC and started like using Fast Tracker there. And of course, one of the classics I remember was the audio interface. I had one of these parallel port adapters, where because of the 8 bits of the parallel port, we just like soldered on resistors onto them. I think my cousin made them. Could like get a really rough 8-bit audio out of it.
Right.
Nice.
But then eventually got like this Sound Blaster 16 and I think and then the AAV32 for the wavetable synthesis. And I think at some point I also started using Cakewalk Pro Audio. And I think I really loved the ability that you could just put the like audio files on the timeline, but you can also like put events within the clip. So that was always something that felt natural to me, that you could just
clip editing,
kind of like sequence samples in a convenient way there.
Yes.
So I kind of like started down that journey a bit, got a few more keyboards. I think I initially got I got the Roland XP10, which is like the shitty version of XP50 because you can't program anything.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
And then started collecting a bit more gear. I think the AN1X from Yamaha, that was one of
I remember that.
Next one, that's a nice one. So
a little virtual analogy type of thing. Yes.
Yeah. And then at some point the computer got a bit better. I think I switched at some point to use Logic, and I think my favorite feature was there that I could just automatically loop clips without having to like copy them.
Right. So were you still on Windows there, or had you transitioned over to
still
Mac?
on Windows.
Still on Windows, yeah. Yep.
No.
Logic on Windows. Yep. Yeah, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then, of course, as you mentioned, Logic on Windows eventually had a demise, and that's when I sort of switched to use Cubase SX, I think.
Right. So that would have been, we're heading into early 2000s, 2003, 4, 5, somewhere around there. Yeah. I would say that would be around that timeline. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, during that time, I upgraded the computer a few times. But by the way, I always build the machines myself. I got the knack for that at some point.
Oh, very cool.
So, yeah. So it's a little bit of what you're doing.
Yep.
But in a smaller scale.
Yeah, of course. Yep.
And I think at one point I got like the dual Celeron machine. And if I remember correctly, that one was a nightmare with glitches that were like, I think every time I got a MIDI message, I got like a click on it. So
right.
That was sort of horrible.
Nice.
So that was not the best machine for that.
No, those early dual CPU machines had some additional challenges. Let's leave it at that.
But that's impressive. Yeah. So you went from soldering your own parallel port audio all the way through to Cakewalk and then Cubase and stuff there. So that's kind of the full gamut of technology on the computer.
Well, I didn't solder it myself. That was my cousin who did it.
So. Right. Don't tell me that. You soldered yourself. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to cut this bit out, right? Yeah, and then, of course, the double Celeron was a bit problematic, but then I upgraded to the Athlon 1400, I think, once the gigahertz race really started. So that was more reliable.
Yeah, the megahertz war, I call it, you know.
Yeah,
the megahertz, hertz, H-U-R-T-Z, I used to spell it.
It's interesting that you started on Cakewalk there for a while. You know, we had Noel from Cakewalk here just a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, it was
then,
a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us you didn't use CorelDRAW as well on the PC, right?
No.
Okay.
Ah,
All right. I just want to make sure we didn't have too many ties between these.
Yeah. Well, I've seen it growing up, but it's a bit, yeah. I didn't continue using it.
Right. Well, Noel does send his regards. I was having a bit of a chat to him after the show and told him that you were coming on. So he does send his regards. Claes?
Oh, thank you, Noel. Noel's a nice guy. I really enjoy meeting him at trade shows and such. So.
Yeah. Look, he was great. We could have kept chatting for another 2 hours, but we were already 2 hours in, and I think, probably the listener at that end, they were starting to melt in their chair. So we thought we'd tap it at 2 hours. All right. So where are we? We're at Cubase Athlon.
SX.
Yeah. Cubase and Athlons.
So anyway, at the same time, I sort of, growing up at that age, I think it was like late teens or whatever at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe also was like into computer gaming, of course, and upgraded the graphics card or whatever. And at the university, I studied electrical engineering, but I really got into computer graphics programming as well. So that was sort of like one of the things I could consider doing, like a profession. So I also did my master's thesis there, like develop an algorithm for rendering water in an efficient time. And that was just the time when like the pixel shaders stuff appeared on the graphics card, that they started to become something you can program in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of interesting. And I sort of considered doing a PhD on that, but then I decided, I'm going to work with audio and start doing plugins. So
right. Awesome.
after the uni, I started my company, Vember Audio,
Mm-hmm.
and that was 2003.
Right.
I released the first product, Short Circuit, the sampler.
Right.
And at that time, I mean, the plugin market was something completely different than what it is today. It's like you hardly had any instrument that really sounded good. It's like, I mean, if you considered digital synthesizers at the time, they had really nice sounds. I mean, they had very well engineered anti-aliasing approaches, you know, to get a really clean sound. I mean, of course, it's not as good as what we have today, but it was really good. But if you compare the software at that point, it was like almost just a naive implementation of everything.
Yes.
And,
yeah.
so that was sort of an interesting time when a lot of things were happening there. So I started out with the sampler, of course, as a one-man company, sort of like, okay, we put it on the KVR forum, whatever, and see who's getting it. But I started getting some sales, and at that point, I still lived at my parents' place. And after finishing the university, so I did the sampler the first year, and the second year I did Surge, the synthesizer.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that also took like about a year. I would say that's the cycle. But at that point, yeah, okay.
Yep. Sorry. Well, the Surge synth. I mean, I looked it up again this week. That's still kicking. I mean, you've moved it to open source, but that's still being very widely used. And I'm on the website watching a video of Roger Lynn with his MPE controller just absolutely comping away on this synth, and I'm like, that just sounds incredible. So if that's from 2000, what'd you say, 2004?
I think that one was released 2005.
Okay, well, I mean, still,
yeah.
You know, if that synth was released in 2005, what I was hearing coming off the screen, coming off that video, was fantastic. So, you know, that was, to me, I think that was a synth that was probably a little ahead of its time.
Yeah. I think you could say that.
Yeah.
And did you design the whole interface for Surge as well, or?
Yes, I mean, I did everything on that one.
I was wondering because I smell a little bit of Bitwig in the UI there, so I was curious.
Yeah, there's a lineage.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, Claes, I have a question for you. So you did all of this work in college for graphics, right? And you did your master's in graphics and stuff. And then right when you left school, you went right into audio. So kind of what was the driver there? Like, why did you decide to go into audio and not continue in graphics?
Well, I didn't do graphics the whole time. I mean, my master's project, I mean, that's half a year. That was dedicated to graphics, and I did a few courses in graphics and like was interested in programming graphics as well and did it sort of like a hobby at some point. But I also at the same time messed with sound. So like,
Yeah, you picked the two. So I was just thinking about all the math that you had to have at the time. It's like you picked the two different sort of tracks where it's like all that calculus and trig and stuff that you had learned over the years is a total requirement. So it's not like audio was easier than graphics. It's just two different options for you.
But they're quite similar in a way, you know.
Yeah.
There's a lot of similarity in what you do. I mean, it is sort of signal processing. If it's 2-dimensional or 1-dimensional, it's very related, I think.
And we're starting, not to go too far off on a tangent, but we're starting to see, I say starting, some of these things have been going on for a long time, interest in processing audio in a very graphics-like way with using GPUs and more parallel processing and stuff like that. So I imagine a lot of the graphics work that you've done over the years will sort of come back into play here over the next decade.
Yeah, who knows? Could be. So anyway, I mean, if we want to continue the journey, so at that point, I had my own company. I made some money, but not a huge amount. I mean, I could probably have made a lot more if I marketed it the right way and so on. But anyway, I felt like I was a bit bored working just for myself, you know? So I had to make a choice. Okay, either I try to make this thing grow and become big and so I can like hire people and stuff, or I just go do something else. So I ended up then, okay, I went to Berlin to start working at Ableton and did it for a short while.
And what year was that, Claes?
That was 2007.
2007.
Beginning there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Cool.
So I did a quick stint there where I did quite a few of the audio devices in some of the releases. So I did like the vocoder and like the multiband effects was one of my inventions. And of course, there's a funny story related to this is that there's this plugin called OTT from Steve Duda, you know, from Xfer Records. And he did that based on a multiband effects presets called OTT that I did.
Right.
But I've heard about this plugin and that people kind of like rave about it, like in this more like bass music or modern stuff. That it's basically just a multiband preset that flattens everything and make everything like just gel totally. Mm-hmm. And I always knew there was something familiar with that one. It's like, where
have I heard that before?
Where have I heard that before? And then I sort of realized that when I'm checking up on it, that was like 2 or 3 years ago. I was just like, where do I? So I just Googled and saw, okay, he based it on the OTT preset for the multiband effects in Ableton. So well, anyway, I did that one. So then wrote to him about it, and he was like, yeah. He also thought it was very funny.
Yeah, it's a small world. There you go.
Yeah,
come full circle. Awesome.
Exactly. So anyway, then at some point, I think I'm like just the kind of person that I don't think I should work for anyone else, because I've only did it that short while, basically. I think I was there 2 years. Mm-hmm. And then I think I always want to be like in control of my own destiny. I have my own ideas. And if you go to a different company, there's always like plans already made, you know, for the future, and they're going in a certain direction. And I had a lot of different ideas that I want to do. Like one thing that I always thought was limiting is that when I developed a software synthesizer, that you didn't have much per note control. You know, like the only parameter you have on a per note basis is velocity. Mm-hmm. Like there's only this one parameter, right?
Yep.
And of course, you can use CCs or automation, but it's more cumbersome. It's not as elegant as just clicking a note and saying, "Oh, I want to change this a little bit," or whatever. Okay, so that was always like an idea that I wanted to be able to have more control on a per note basis, but you can't really. I mean, if you make a plugin, you can't change the interface. You can't change VST to have more parameters, and you can't change the DAW to present you with more information. So, but once we started thinking about Bitwig, that was like one of the main ideas that we wanted to do this kind of more expressive. What ended up being note expressions in a way that you could draw these automation parameters for the timbre and pressure parameters, and also control the pitch in this kind of WYSIWYG way, that you can just see what's happening.
Yep.
And that's a very popular thing now. You're starting to see, kind of the evolution of that out there between controllers and software and stuff.
Yeah. So, and when we started Bitwig, that was one idea. I think we were the first to do it at the time, but we didn't announce it. And then Steinberg come out with the per note
expression maps
in VST3.
Yeah.
But I mean, of course, they're all very related, and they're sort of convertible. So, of course, if we now load a VST3 plugin into Bitwig, we can use these VST3 expressions to output that data. So that's all good.
Mm-hmm. So you were at Ableton for how long did you say? A couple of years?
I was there 2 years.
Right. Now, the interesting thing for me, because I've been doing as much research as I can about the history of the company, is that your co-founders, there's 4 of yous, and you were all ex-Ableton. So my question popped into my head. Were you, or a couple of questions. One, were you at Ableton all together? And how quickly did Bitwig come about after you guys? Did you guys leave independently at different time? Did you leave all at the same time? Was there any discussion around the water tank? The water jug. So they're the kind of
probably.
Yeah, right. So were you guys all at Ableton together, and did you actually know each other there?
Yeah, well, we knew each other. I mean, that's where we met. So
right. Okay. And so did you all leave at the same time, or?
Not exactly, but close enough.
So. Right. Okay. All right. So the 4 of yous decided to found Bitwig. So, we can pick up the ball from there if you like.
Yeah. So anyway, of course, starting a new company, I don't remember exactly who or where said it or so, but I had the feeling that at that point in time, it seemed like crazy to start a new DAW. It's like, wait a minute, these companies are there since forever, and it's like a saturated market in a way. And, you need to have a pretty long roadmap to actually develop a shipping product. But anyway, we went for it and tried to do it. We had a lot of ideas and started out doing that. And we sort of imagined that, okay, let's try to make something where we can get ready in 2 years. But of course, it ended up taking a bit longer than that. But I also think that if you would do realistic time planning, you would never go on an adventure like this. So it's good not to do it.
Yeah. So what was the development? So from the initial first step to the release was how many years do you think, Claes?
Well, we started working on this in 2009. And we shipped version 1 in the beginning of 2014. So that's roughly 5 years.
Right. Okay. So there's 5 years in the development of it. Right. I actually, for some reason, I thought it was a little bit, there was a release prior to that, but there you go. Okay. So that puts a timestamp on it.
So was it really the per note expression and your desire to not work for somebody else? I mean, are those the two things that drove Bitwig, or like was there another Was there something else that you're like, I want to do this, and the only way to do it is to create a product called Bitwig Studio?
No, there were other things as well. Everything about the software that's a bit different are coming from these initial ideas. Most of it, there were like this idea that the workflow could be more friendly. The idea that everything is like real time and malleable. That of course Ableton also had. That's sort of an sideway inheritance from them,
right?
But also different like sound design ideas. I mean, I have my synth building background, and I think that puts a very strong like focus on sound design that we have, like with the modulation routings that we have. That sort of like is inherited from Surge in a way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the modulation and also the grid, which again, that's an environment where you can build pretty much anything. Do you want to give us some detail? Actually, no. Before we do that, before we get to grid, put a pin in it just for a second, because I've got a question, and I was asked by one of my close friends, and he said, "Can you please ask Claes how the name came about?" So, how did you guys come up with the name Bitwig?
Well, it was one of us who thought it up, and there's like no real official meaning to it. And I think such a thing is also better if everyone can have their own interpretation
of what it means. Yeah,
I always tend to think a bit like the bigwig, that term, but like more for a modern era, for the digital age.
Yeah, right. That's cool. Actually, that's a cool interpretation. I'll actually remember that one.
I love how you're doing the movie director thing and just saying like, you make up your own reason why we have this. Yeah.
But one thing is for sure, like when you're looking for a name and you Google it and you get 0 hits, that's like, okay, that's the one.
Yeah. Oh, right. Oh, well, initially, yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah, that's brilliant. That's awesome. All right. The grid. That was one of the later
that was
features.
One of the later things.
Yeah. So can you just go into some detail about the modulation routings first, because that's a key feature. Also, you've got two working environments. You've got your linear environment, which is the more traditional DAW, but you've also got your what do you call it? Clip launcher? Is that what you call it?
We call it the clip launcher.
Yeah. So do you want to give us some detail on those two environments?
Yes. The arranger is what you always know. Linear arrangement that you can play back. But of course, one thing that's really important about the DAW like this is that, like internally, we always think about beat time. Like we're thinking about beats. We're not internally counting seconds like a lot of DAWs are, and that really changes a lot of things all around it. How things work, how you work with raw audio, how fades work. Like it does change quite a lot of things, because what you can do in Bitwig that you can't do everywhere else is like just change stuff like tempo on the fly. You don't need to automate it. You can just like drag it up and the song will keep playing and everything is in sync. So it's based more around the idea of timing wise,
yes,
of the old MIDI sequencer than the tape player is. And an interesting experiment to do in a lot of DAWs is to see what happens when you change tempo while it's playing. That's always an interesting experiment to like try to figure out, okay, how does the machine work on the inside,
Yeah, and since you're beat based, there's a lot less math involved in when you change.
Well, there's different math,
I'm just trying to get away from having to do math, so yeah.
On a traditional DAW, you might have issues that the audio tracks are like locked into clock time, and the note tracks are locked into musical time, so that if you change the tempo, they actually like drift apart.
Right.
Like that might be one of the things that you expect, but we're like more focused towards beat time, like counting in beats, and live in that domain. And that also means that the timeline can then also change dynamically, which is the clip launcher that you can just say, okay, I want to launch a new clip and switch to that playback lane. And
Right.
everything like that can happen on the fly. So
Interesting. So even internally, your audio is synchronized to beats, not to time. Then.
yeah, the audio is always working over the warp timeline inside the audio event. It's basically providing a translation from the current beat time into samples time, and then the audio engineering is playing it back from that, depending on which the time stretching algorithm you picked up. So of course, this makes it important that the normal time stretching that we have, that it stays neutral at neutral settings. So there's always a lot of users who say that, okay, but I want it in raw because it's more neutral. But no, we actually make sure that the normal stretch mode is neutral at neutral settings, so that you can use the comfort of that. You can then switch the tempo if you want to for some reason, or hey, maybe you just want to record something at a different tempo, and the timeline will adapt itself for it instead of just everything becoming out of time. That would happen with a raw playback.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it's almost, you approached it almost like it could always be a performance mode. So you do have a lot of focus on using Bitwig Live as well as a live performance tool. Well, I see that as well with the modulation stuff, and so was that a focus as well for the actual live aspect of usage?
Yes, sure, a bit, but I also think, like, personally, like, the main motivation is just to keep the creativity flowing. That, like, hey, I want to try this idea quickly out. Like, you don't have to feel like you have to stop and then restart and
right,
get these interruptions while you're working.
Yes, right.
So it just feels very fluid and always going. I think that's like an important part of it.
Yeah. Right, awesome. And just getting back to the grid, can you give us an overview of what the grid is?
Yeah, the grid is I think we can call it like a creative sound design environment within Bitwig Studio that we added in version 3.
Right.
And of course, there was a long journey to that point. And it actually started out already with version 1, because when we started version 1, we had the modulation system that's kind of inherited from Search, like philosophically how it works. That we had, for example, in the polysynth at the time, you had the synthesizer. It had a few different modulation sources built into it. Like, okay, they had 3 LFOs, and you could click these little icons that represented the modulation source, and you enter this kind of like modulation mapping mode, where you then could drag any parameter to assign it.
Yep.
So these were kind of like special in a way that, yes, it's polyphonic and it's happening at audio rate. So you can have like an LFO going up into the kilohertz range and it still works. And that's something that the audio engine was like designed from the beginning to do, because I was also very much into vector instructions on the CPU and stuff like that. So it's really built from the ground up to run very efficiently. And these modulation mappings was, of course, also a way to like solve the interface problem, that if you want to do modulation mappings within a device, the classic way might have been to do a modulation matrix, but it takes a lot of screen real estate to do it. So we want to have a solution where, okay, we can have this small icon representing a source, and then you can just assign it to any number of destinations that you want. So that's kind of started out that way, but we also had a concept called device nesting, which means that you could take your synth and put it inside another device, inside of one of its nested device chains. So we had, for example, I think it was called Audio Mod or LFO. I don't really remember. These are deprecated now, but you can still use them if you want to. Like devices where you could have something like an envelope follower tracking the audio input, but then make that affect any kind of parameter on the device level, because you can map from this, like the parent device onto the nested one.
Interesting, yeah.
Which was a bit technical, but there were some users who really enjoyed the flexibility that gave you. And on the way to version 2, we then expanded on that we said, okay, it's nice that Polysynth has 3 LFOs that you can freely map, but it kind of sucks that you have 3 LFOs that you either don't use and still have to see them, or you want more of them, or you want something else other than an LFO. Maybe you want like an ADSR in addition, or a sidechain input. So version 2 sort of started a thing where we stripped out all the modulations within that were fixed function inside the devices and made them a small little device that you could add yourself freely. So that was like when the whole modulation system came full circle with version 2.
Right.
Because you could then take these modulations, assign as many of them as you want to any kind of parameter you want. And you could also do that on plugins. Of course, with the plugin, there's the limitation that it's not polyphonic, it's just monophonic, but still, it gives you this whole freedom that you can do all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. And so the grid was another step forward in evolution of that is ideas?
Exactly. So you could say with version 2, we sort of had like the modulation aspect like solved at a like on the high level. That we figured out, okay, you can take any parameter and have it modulated, and if we want to provide a new way of modulating something, okay, we need to build a new modulator, but the system was there. But of course, with this sort of sound generating, it had its limit. I mean, we had the few instruments we've built into it, and we added some. We added like the Phase 4 synthesizer in I think it was version 2.3, and improved the sampler in 2.4 or so. But there was no really free environment where you could have the feeling that, oh, this is kind of like limitless. I could do anything within this. So the grid, I started working on it even before version 2. So it's been developed for quite a long while. But it took a while to really figure out, okay, what's the best kind of like balance in terms of user interface? How complex should it be, and how flexible does it have to be? Like, just figuring out the right design for it. Like, I think technically it was already working in some extent at that point, but really it needed a lot of time to mature to really get to the level where we said that, okay, this is what it should be, and then we did like a nice sprint for version 3 and really made a lot of modules, and bam, released
awesome.
that as the new feature.
Yep, awesome.
So Claes, so you're still a pretty small company, right? So how do you all make those decisions? You're talking about the trade-offs where, somebody will be like, no, we want all the flexibility in the world, but they don't know that makes the UI super complicated. Like, how do you all make those decisions internally? Is this like a per programmer thing, or can you talk about that process just a little?
Yeah, I think it always starts with that we have some idea, maybe what could be interesting, and we don't really try to specify to the end, or like do a lot of mock-ups. We do some, but that process would also take a lot of time. But I think we really invested a lot into like the technology behind the product, so that we can quite quickly try different ideas.
Right.
Like, I think that's one of the main things that we try to do, to be as fast as possible, to just, okay, let's do a quick dirty version of this, see just how does it feel, like try to get a good feeling of how the product would be to interact with it.
So is it still the original 4 of you that founded the company, Claes?
No, well, we changed a little bit. There's one who left, but we're now joined by quite a lot of people. I think we're across 20 now, actually.
Right. Okay.
But in terms of development, we're quite small. I mean, there's 4 developers, or actually 5 that are kind of like established now, and we have 2 more just getting sort of started. So let's see what comes out of that. And it's still a small team. I think if you talk to the other DAW manufacturers, most of them also have very small
Yes,
core
yes,
teams.
right. yes, definitely. Yeah. And some of the teams are as small as 2 or 3 developers. So yeah, quite amazing.
And of course, you're going to have the average customer writing emails and expecting this to be some huge corporation.
Yeah,
They always do, right?
yeah.
So Vin, I have a question here that I'd like to dive a little bit more deeper in, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
If so, Claes, you're multi-platform, right? So
Yeah.
Linux, Windows, Mac. On just as a side, on the Mac side, are you on the M1 now, or is that sort of plans? Or
Well, I mean, like everyone else, of course, we're working on it. It's
right.
I mean, that can be a big secret.
Yeah. So I was just thinking though that supporting all 3 of those when you're talking about different processor instruction sets and optimizing things and stuff, that's going to be quite a challenge. Can you talk a little bit about the architecture and kind of how the small team works together to support all of those?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's like when we started, we had a pretty good platform split because I was, since I was a Windows user, and Volker's doing most of the timeline stuff, is a Mac user, and Nick is like an avid Linux user. So we had each had our home platform. So it kind of ended up being the responsibility of each one to, okay, you fix the platform specific stuff on each platform, but of course we write as much as possible on a cross-platform basis. Mm-hmm. So that it's just going to be this platform-specific implementation of the edge classes, but everything else is like, okay, it's a shared code base. So what's unusual about Bitwig, I think, is that we have this multiprocessor architecture, that the main application is actually not even written in C++, but written in Java. And we have our own document language developed that basically takes a defined document model and then generates code to communicate between different processes in different languages. So the main application which then contains it keeps track of the document and gives you the GUI and everything. That's what you interact with, then starts the engine process and communicates with that. And so that gives you a few interesting advantages. And one of them is if, let's say, the engine crashes, it could either be our fault or it could be like a plugin. Then actually you don't lose any data because all the document is stored in the other process.
Right.
So that was one of our early interesting features that we had that really set it as apart from the other ones. It's like this crash protection. And we took it even further by putting we added the ability for each plugin to be in a separate process as well. Or you could group them in different ways. We have 5 different levels of crash protection that you can use.
So the UI that you have, like you said, all the document management, all that stuff, everything that people normally interact with, that's a Java application. And then the audio engine, the back end, is another process. And that's a C++ application at that point?
Yes, correct.
Right. So it's interesting that you're getting such good performance out of that, considering you're crossing kind of a boundary. So you must have been pretty smart about how that interaction happens and what kind of data goes between the 2 processes.
Well, I mean, of course, you need to watch out for some things, but it also brings you quite a lot of benefits. I mean, one of the points that you just have this fixed pipe through which the data moves also forces you to solve certain problems in the correct way and not do dirty hacks and just passing pointers around it. So it really adds a lot to the predictability of the code. And of course, I mean, C++ is used everywhere, but honestly, I don't think it's a very good language. It's way too verbose. You have all these constructs within it. It's like the whole include system is a mess because it's just taking text of your header file and dumping it into the compile context, and you have all the defines, which basically means that an IDE it can't understand the code because it could mean 2 different things depending on which context you load it.
Yep.
And if you then compare that to something with Java, which is kind of like, yes, you could write a simple parser for this and have like an object representation, which you really know is true. It's sort of obvious that things like IDEs, like refactoring, work so much better, and it's just so much quicker to work with that. So I would say like the productivity is maybe like 3 times higher.
Right. Yeah, doing UIs in C++ is a miserable thing. People do it, but it's not fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a bit sad that there's no other languages that are a bit more suited to this. And of course, C++ will never be better because they keep adding features. They actually need to remove features, not adding them.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
You mentioned pipes. So are you using pipes between the two processes, or can you talk about that? I know it's sort of how the sausage is made type stuff.
Well, of course, pipes and shared memory, whatever we need. Like we use the different mechanisms that are available to us from the OS. But that works fine. I mean, of course, shared memory gives us all the bandwidth we need. So,
yep. It's of all the DAWs that we've looked at, this is, and Vin, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the only one with this type of architecture. But I can see how it would give you kind of the best of both worlds there.
And are you meaning where it's kind of the processes are running independently? So, if a plugin or the audio, even the audio engine crashes, the whole application doesn't come down on itself. So, yeah, that is kind of unique. Look, the other unique aspect of it is Linux. I mean, that's we really should mention more about the Linux development. I mean, I'm not sure how much you've played with Linux, Pete, but I mean, I'm surrounded by it. I've got it on, as you know, I've got it on all my laptops. So
I was running a server tier for a while. So
so for all of the the basic computing stuff, away from my DAW development stuff and my business applications, I love using Linux. But have I dabbled with the audio side of it? No, and probably more so because of the plugin availability more than anything else. So this is probably a question for Claes. And how do you guys get around that regards the plugin availability for Bitwig? I mean, the inbuilt plugins are obviously native, but how do you get around the third-party offerings in Linux?
I think that totally depends on the user, how many plugins they need and which ones. There are also a few projects that let you run Windows plugins on Linux. It doesn't work for everything, but it apparently works for quite a lot.
Right. So have you got an idea of how big your user base is actually on Linux? It doesn't have to be an exact, but just, a rough type of idea.
I think it's somewhere around, I'd guess between 5 to 10% or so.
Okay.
Which is a quite high number.
Substantial.
Yeah, of course.
It's not the normal distribution of Linux user in the big masses. So I think, it's a valid platform to target because you're going to get users who you wouldn't get otherwise.
They say this industry is different from the normal distribution of casual users for all the operating systems there. So I'm not surprised Linux is doing better here.
Yeah. Hey, I do have a question, and this is, an area that I've focused a lot of time and energy over the last couple of decades, and that's the low latency DAW performance and cross-platform performance as well. So on Linux, what's the preferred low latency audio driver that's being used?
Well, you would use ALSA if you want the lowest latency.
Yes, right.
I think that's...
Okay.
I've heard of Jack, but not also. So what's also?
Well, Jack is basically like an abstraction layer that allows multiple applications to mix together, and Jack is then typically going to use ALSA as the way to output sounds.
Okay.
So ALSA itself is the low latency driver. And look, I know certain interface manufacturers have ALSA supported drivers, and RME have. So that's interesting. So my question would be, have you guys noticed or have you measured any performance variables between the three operating systems? Because that's a pretty important question for people that are maybe weighing up going cross-platform or changing platforms, say from PC to Mac, Mac to PC, or if they want to start playing with Linux. Is there any performance variables between the three that you're aware of?
Well, we haven't done any special benchmarking ourselves in that sense. It's not like we've set up the same machines on the different platforms and compare them. So
okay, right.
But I do hear that people have great performance from it. So I guess from the processing point of view, Linux is pretty good there. You have a lot of all these custom real-time kernels that you could even use, but it seems like people don't need them because it's already good enough.
Right. Okay.
And personally, I think that one of the areas where Windows is really lagging is the I/O performance of the disk. It's I think that's like one of these topics that really hurts it, and we've just like as developers tried stuff in house that okay, if the Linux guy on identical hardware checks out like the source tree repository, maybe if it takes 9 seconds for him, it's going to take like almost a minute on Windows. So I do really believe that there's something with the way that the file system model is on Windows that really hampers it performance-wise. I don't really know exactly what it is, but I suspect it has something to do with it, like the lock mechanism. Like on POSIX, you have a different kind of locking where basically you create the file handle and you get a view on the thing, but it might have changed since someone opened it last, and but whereas on Windows you have a file handle and you say, okay, I need to lock it, and it needs to be locked globally.
Yeah,
for everyone.
We ran into some of those differences when we were doing the Windows subsystem for Linux, where originally we were mapping Linux kernel calls to NT, but you had things like on Linux you can go and remove a directory that you have another window open in or a file open in, no problem at all. Where on Windows, we do a check and then we fail if you actively have that open in another application. So yeah, there's a lot of those checks that happen on Windows that don't happen on Linux. Plus, Linux has more options for file systems that you can optimize for different uses too. So
right, okay. Yeah. Now, so what about Windows versus Mac OS? That would probably be more prevalent for the majority of people listening in, more so than Linux. So is there any noticeable performance variable between Mac OS and Windows that you've seen, or is the performance quite comparable across the two?
Not that we know of in terms of processing. I think they're quite comparable.
Right.
We had some issues with graphics performance on OS X because there were some very weird issues there where if you connected an external monitor in some configurations, something weird happened on the OS X level and it just like slowed down. So we had a lot of these different issues on Mac that never ever was an issue on Windows or Linux. So
okay, that's interesting.
But it seems to be a lot of different applications that are also affected in these ways.
Right. Yeah, I was referring more to the low latency performance side of it. But now, with the audio engine, you guys running a hybrid playback buffer system, or are you running natively off the latency setting of the audio interface?
No, we're running on the native setting.
Yeah. Okay. That's okay. Very cool. All right. So, is there any chatter about looking at a hybrid engine, or is that just something that doesn't really interest you at this point?
I don't think it's the right design for us because, I mean, as I mentioned before, we're very focused about real time and we compute stuff in beat time. So that also means that, the traditional DAW, he knows what's going to happen the next 20 seconds.
Yep.
Exactly in time because his timeline is already pre-written. For us, it can change dynamically. So that of course changes things. But we also, I think we have a different focus that we do this whole sound design thing where a lot of synthesis is something that we do ourselves. that makes it more interesting to try to optimize like the multi-threading, that we try to use that as much as we can to play different voices on different CPUs, for example, or different cores.
Right. Okay. So you've got virtual instruments that actually multi-thread within themselves. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, all our native devices actually do that. So like if you load Polysynth or the grid or whatever and play multiple noises, they actually get spread to different cores.
Wow.
And even if you use the voice stacking feature, that's going to spread even more. So there's a lot of like opportunity for parallelism there.
Yeah, but it also alleviates the problem of one core being loaded a lot more, where if you're playing one virtual instrument with a lot of polyphony, for example, that's not all landing on the single core. So that's actually quite clever. I don't know too many virtual instruments that actually do. I know a couple, but that's an interesting point, very interesting point.
I would think, so do you guys keep, do you have anything in your code that kind of takes the UI and shoves it on a different core, or like, do you do any optimization there, or you just let the operating systems deal with it?
No, that would just leave it to the operating system in terms of UI.
Okay. Now, in regards to the audio tracks and the processing per audio track, that is assigned per processor. Is that like the more traditional DAWs do that, where the processing is per track? Do you have that as well?
I mean, yes. I mean, each track becomes its own like worker unit that we deal with. But of course, when we go to our instruments, or if we use something like this, different instrument layers or things like this, we can actually then process that also in parallel. And of course, it's more efficient if we do it that way, because we have our own thread pool, and we can then reuse this thread pool to actually like deal with individual voices.
Mm-hmm.
But if a plugin goes ahead and do this, it's going to use a lot of more OS resources to do it. Like if every single instance of a plugin you have, it's going to like grab eight threads.
Yes,
it's going to use more resources.
Yes. And I do know a couple of synthesizers that have that feature. So that would be interesting. We won't name them, but Claes probably is aware of a few that do that. Now, talking about threading and multiprocessing, I'll leave the elephant in the room till a little bit later, but I will ask the question, do you guys actually have a core thread limit that you can multi-thread to, or CPU core limit?
I don't think we do, as far as I can remember.
Right.
I mean, of course, there's going to be a practical one.
Yep.
At some point.
Yes.
But
and the reason I ask that is that as these CPU technologies are developing and the number of cores are increasing and more people are actually having access to these higher core CPUs, we're starting to see some threading issues within the DAWs that anything above 32 I've always found to be a little bit squirrely. If squirrely is a word, but it up to 32 seemed to be this kind of ceiling, almost a glass ceiling that, and I've had the discussion.
32 cores.
Yeah, 32 threads. No, sorry, we'll say 32 threads, right?
Threads meaning
cores,
okay,
not threads. Programming threads, as in as Intel's version of threads, as in core. So they'll say 6-core, 12 threads, all right? So in that term, so we'll say 32, let's say 32 core, make it easier. And I remember we were having a discussion about, where this 32 core limit could come from. And the discussion led us to, we were talking about memory address space, and then that was leading us down another rabbit warren. And there was some legacy code that was mentioning 32 cores, and I remember we were weighing up whether, I wonder if that is this kind of ceiling thing that we've been seeing, where anything above that seems to get a little bit weird. Do you remember that discussion, Pete, or was that kind of?
I remember the limit in terms of some other technology, but it's all fuzzy now when it comes back to what the old stuff was.
Because it was one of those discussions where we were it was about the memory address space, and then I found an article, and then there was this mention of 32 core. And I went, I wonder if that was it. But again, look, so in practice, and just to explain it to Claes, because we've been, when I say we, myself and my CPU test partner, who's Pete in Scan in the UK, who has access to these larger machines, and sometimes I don't, especially the larger core AMD machines. So, I can test up to, I'm more Intel based, so I test up to the 18 core 36 thread. Now, the thing that we were noticing is that there definitely seemed to be a limit on the real-time engine with the Steinberg product at 32 threads. And I can actually define that exactly by, Cubase 9, my MMCSS unofficial fix, and turn off AJ Guard onto the real-time engine. It threads to 32. That's it. There is hard limit at 32. It ignores the top 4. So there was a 32 thread limit on the real-time engine. With AJ Guard, then it can stretch to 36. But even in Reaper itself, where it was 60, the official thing was capable of 64 core and then up to 128. But we were seeing anything above 32 was not threading evenly. So there was even issues with that one. I had that discussion with Justin, and especially I had a follow-up discussion when he went to 128 thread, and we managed to get a hold of a 64 core Threadripper 128 thread, and Windows couldn't even see the top 64 threads because it broke the threading into 2 groups of 64, and Reaper wasn't capable of actually accessing the top 64. So that's a whole other show that I think I'm
right. Yeah, it's just a different API set.
Yeah,
to use, yeah.
But for that first 64 thread grouping, we've just noticed. I haven't seen a DAW that can actually cleanly thread above 32 threads, where it's actually utilizing that 32 to 64 well, and it's just not correlating in the numbers, and I've got a very empirical and linear way of actually an incremental way of increasing the load, so we can measure this threading and scaling quite accurately. And you just don't see it. So I don't know what the limitation is there. I know that with the 18-core 36 thread, that seems to be fine with the Steinberg product. But anything above that, the thing's collapsing and landing on one thread. I don't want to discuss that one, right? Because that seems to be a huge bug, right?
One logical core, yeah.
It just lands on completely one core. Yeah, core 0.
The whole The thing for Claes here, like when we're talking threads at this point, we're talking CPU threads, not app threads,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
All right. So you guys, so Bitwig, you don't know of a limit of the number of cores that you can thread to?
We don't have a practical limit inserted.
Right.
I'm not really sure what will happen if you put it on a really big machine, like with 128 threads, because we haven't tested it.
Okay, this is going to be my project for the year, is that I'm going to start building the DAW, the DAWbench session, the large session that I've created for DAWbench 2021. The plugin one is not that hard to port across, but the virtual instrument one, I'm already in pain just thinking about it, because we're talking 496 instances of contact.
Ouch.
with matching MIDI data. So I've got a MIDI file that I can actually export out of my Reaper session, but then I've got to import that into another DAW, and then I have to create instrument tracks, and then I have to assign the MIDI to those instrument tracks. I was chatting to Noel about it, and I'm like going, this is going to take me forever. But that's my project for 2021, is that I'm going to port that monster session across to the other DAWs and including Bitwig. So then that way, and I'll do the plugin ones are easier. So that way I can actually do some comparative scaling, and then we can see if there's any breakpoints with the core counts as well.
It'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, there's the core counts have been going up, and the Apple's work and just kind of ARM in general has boosted that, and plus AMD and what they're doing. But at least on the Windows side, like you said, you have to call some different APIs to get above 64 cores. So at some point, all the DAW companies that haven't already done that will have to do it.
Yeah, but again, it's economy of scale, Pete. How many end users are going to be using a 64-core / 128-thread machine? I'd say not many.
Depends how many years from now you're talking, right? So things go the way they are.
Yeah, but but is it? I don't think. I think we're
hard to say.
Yeah, I don't think
it's the future.
Yeah, I don't think we've hit the peak just yet. But I think core counts, they are slowing down. I mean, AMD kind of shifted the game a little bit by using those CCX modules. So they've got a higher yield because they're not trying to produce an 18-core chip or a 28-core chip or
two
a 32
CPUs on one.
Well, they're basically, the biggest is 8, or is it the large one 16? No, I think they're actually 8-core CCXs, and then they stitch them together. So that's very clever, and so that's how they've got that higher yield. But how many can you keep stitching together is the question. I don't think we're going to be, I think that 64-core 128 thread in a single CPU, I don't think we're going to be seeing
I think this is probably a topic for another show, but I think ARM is going to drive that more than AMD. But
yes, but ARM needs more cores to actually match an x86 core, and there's that rabbit warren. Down we go. Now, just so we don't get too sidetracked, I do want to ask Claes. And again, you can call me the MMCSS Avenger from now on, right? But I am going to ask Claes, MMCSS,
this is when I go get a drink.
Yeah, how heavily is it? How heavily is it implemented, if at all, within Bitwig? And have you seen or encountered the thread limit that was introduced in Windows 10?
Well, we did implement it, and we didn't get any report from users about the problem. But when I got myself the first Threadripper, the 1950, as my work machine when it came out.
Now, how many cores? That was 1632, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
So that one actually ran into the limitation, and at that point, I could see that we actually had a problem,
right? Which
was that our code that uses the MMCSS, it didn't encounter had a strategy to deal with when there was a failure there.
Right.
So what we ended up doing was to just check, okay, if this happens, then we just, let's use the normal traditional priority at the highest level, the time critical one. And that's what we ended up doing. So
right.
If you run out of MMCSS threads, just fall back to the normal threading model.
Right.
So, Claes, that's you all are doing your own thread management there, right? You're not using the MMCSS thread pool.
No, we're just using traditional threads. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. This is a common theme because when I talked to the product team about it, they said, "Well, everybody should be using the MMCSS thread pool," and nobody's using the thread pool. So, yeah.
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 All right. So so MMCSS, you saw the problem, but it was easily managed, and I'm not going to say worked around because you didn't work around it. You basically just found another solution where it wasn't going to be causing a problem. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So, all right. Well, that's we can. Put a full stop on the MMCSS, and Pete's probably got a sigh of relief on that one. Is there anything else that you guys want to talk about in regards to the under bonnet stuff?
I have a question.
Yes, go.
because this is even more interesting to me now that I know the UI is Java. And I hate to keep talking about UI, but I don't know, for some reason it keeps coming up here. Maybe because I'm in love with the Bitwig UI. I just like the way it looks. But you all did some touch and pen integration on Surface at one point. And now that I know it's Java, can you talk a little bit about how you did that?
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, we use Java for the application and the GUI, but we actually don't use the classic Java frameworks that you use, like Java AWT, but we instead did our own like layers to the OS. So we probably did pretty much the same thing any other DAW has done, except that we call these platform layers from Java instead of C++, but it's
got it.
Like at the end, we implement pretty much the same thing. But there was actually quite a funny story with the touch release, because I mean, that was when was that? It was like in fall 2015, I think.
Yeah, sounds about right.
There was this Surface Pro 4 launch coming up, and so we were collaborating with them with this launch, because they wanted to have some nice music program they could show, like, okay, what's possible there. And I think it was very exciting for the time as well, because you didn't really know where touch is going to go. Is it now coming to the PC? Is it really going to be a thing?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think in laptops it actually is a thing at the moment. Probably not so much for music making, but for general usage.
Right.
But we did then the version 1.2 release, which contained like some other stuff, like the high DPI GUI and all these kind of things. But then to keep it like exciting for this announcement, we want to like use that buzz as much as we could. We then 2 weeks later released version 1.3, which then included touch support and this special like layout that you have. But of course, we didn't want to upset the Mac users so much, so we just said, okay, we're going to throw in a special bonus. So we did the e-cowbell, which is like this cowbell drum module that everyone got. So.
More cowbell, more cowbell.
More cowbell, exactly.
That's a real challenge, right? So like I know from all the companies that I work with, including outside DAWs, where any one platform, Windows or Mac or Linux, they may have some features that platform, has as its, for example, like Apple with the touch bar on some of their notebooks and stuff. It's really hard for companies like this to decide they're going to implement that feature because they're concerned that it's going to irritate the users that are on the other platforms, or would they start kind of like moving apart from or kind of bifurcating the code too much.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we made sure that we kept everything like unified as much as we could. I mean, since there are no touch APIs on Mac OS, we obviously can't use it there, even if you have the hardware.
Yeah,
I think it's a bit silly at this point, isn't it? But you can use touch on Linux as well, so it works there as well.
Yeah, I think Apple have they're just more focused on keeping a separation between those two product lines. I think that's more than anything else.
I think they made such a strong statement about it before that it's really hard for them to kind of go back on that at this point.
Yeah.
It's just a bit weird that I mean, they obviously have the APIs implemented for it on iOS, so it's a bit weird that they just don't allow you to use the same API in case you have the hardware connected to support it. So that's a bit strange.
Well, with the iPad OS apps and stuff coming over onto Mac OS, maybe that'll change.
Yeah, I think the ARM shift's going to see some changes there, but that's again another rabbit warren. Now, MPE. Now, this is something that I kind of was aware of, and then I stumbled on it a little bit more this week, which is that whole extra MIDI expression layer.
Yeah.
Now, is that something that you guys are focused on at all, Claes?
Yes. I mean, we we're very early into that game, and I mean, I told you about it before that I always had this wish to have more like expression, and that always also like sidelight into the support for the VST3 expressions that we kind of like, we worked on the same thing they did at the same time.
Yep.
Sort of. So our internal note model always had these kind of extra expressions available. And at the time when we released it, that was also the same time that MPE started to, I mean, it didn't exist at that point, but the whole idea of having like a channel per note messaging and using MIDI that you have, if you separate the different keys you're playing on different MIDI channels, you can then use the MIDI pitch band and the different CCs on a per note basis. I mean, that's sort of the idea behind the MPE. That's sort of like getting more of a following. You had stuff like the instrument showing up and the keyboard. So that was just about at that time when we also showed up. And since in our note editor, you can actually just record this data, show it in the note editor. You see like with a WYSIWYG representation, like all the pitch slides you do, you see it actually on top of the actual note. So you get like this absolute idea of what's happening. I actually didn't figure out why Steinberg didn't do it that way, because they just lay that pitch bend thing on top of the note thing, even though they know what the absolute pitch is. So it seems like they didn't really get the same idea about the visual aspect of it, but whatever. So we were there very, very early, and then we collaborated like with Rowley and with Roger Lynn to just make sure that it's well integrated. That okay, if you connect one of these ones, it just gets detected, and you can just play it right away. And since our instruments are all built with our like built-in native framework, once we added support, it was like supported by everything we have within Bitwig. So if you use the grid, you can use MP with that. So it's basically like a unlimited synthesizer for MPE usage.
Right. So the move to MIDI 2 with the higher resolution is going to be something that's going to work in well with that.
I was just thinking about that. With it sounds like Bitwig, or the application is well set up for not just a higher resolution, but MIDI 2, instead of using MIDI notes, it deals with absolute pitch for that stuff, and it has the per note expression built in. So it sounds like Bitwig will be able to handle that just fine.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, let's see when the time comes when the hardware starts showing up.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Pete, when the OS layers,
it's being worked on. It's being worked on.
Yeah.
I actually have it up in Visual Studio right now. So.
Right. Okay. So that you guys were referring to MIDI 2. At OS integration. Yeah. Okay. Well, awesome. All right. So I suppose we can move into the future development. I mean, that's probably an area that is a bit touch and go. If there's, but is there anything that you can actually tell us about the ongoing development of Bitwig, Claes?
Well, I mean, right now we released the grid like 1.5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So since then, we've been doing a few continuous updates. Like version 3.1 had this theme of micro tuning. So we had a new like innovative micro tuning device. I really tried to make that approach simple and understandable. We didn't try to aim for the most powerful micro tuning implementation ever, where you can tune each key on the whole keyboard separately. But we wanted to make something that's really understandable and fun and interactive to use, to really like introduce this concept to masses. Because I think it's a bit of a mystery thing, like what micro tuning is and why I need it. But if you start using it, you actually get, hey, wait a minute, it actually does sound a bit. It has a different kind of like feel to it. The modulation works between the notes works differently. Once you use it, you kind of realize that okay, it's not just a gimmick. It's actually a very nice thing to have.
Yeah. Well, a lot of those Oriental and Eastern scales, they're not the traditional 12 tone, so they're not quite microtonal, but they're definitely outside of the range of the normal 12 tone scalings, where the microtonal stuff can be used, more experimental type of stuff as well. I remember playing with microtonal stuff just by getting old analog synthesizers to self-oscillate back in the day. Not that there was anything definitive about what I was actually achieving, but you were getting those kind of microtonal type of scales running across the keyboard just by the filter self-oscillating. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. So I mean, we thought it was very important to make this feature something that's really accessible and something tangible for a bigger user base than already has it. And then, of course, we follow that up with it's around Christmas. We have a bug fix update coming. So yeah, let's throw in a vocoder. That's what you get for Christmas. So
fun.
I think we released that the day before Christmas or so. Or did we even do it on Christmas Eve? I'm not sure.
It's all a blur. It's all a blur.
Yeah.
In the festive, it was like in the festive season preceding New Year's.
Yes.
In that timeline there. All right, awesome. Now I do have a question regards the Bitwig community, Claes. Do you guys get a lot of feedback from the general community itself, and what is the community like in general in regards to just interacting with each other and also with yourselves?
Well, they're actually more varied than I thought they would be. I mean, I don't interact that much with the community on a personal level because that's more for the supporting and customer care people, and I don't want to spend too much time on the different forums.
Yep.
But I think if you look at like the user base that we're having, that it's very broad, and I would have expected myself that it would have a bit more electronic focus than it has, but it seems to be people who really maybe do kind of like orchestral compositioning that really appreciated the features we did for plugins, like the crash protection, and got into it that way, or appreciate the GUI and really like the kind of workflow. So I think it's quite broad. But we also have a quite vibrant community that they tend to hang out on a Discord where they share different grid patches, where they create this generative music where a patch can go on like for forever, sort of like Eurorack style.
Yeah.
And really share a lot of tips and tricks there. So there's a lot of interaction between them.
Sounds like the sign of a successful product if you've got the communities that you didn't expect to be using it. So,
well, I wouldn't say we didn't expect it, but I think it was broader than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Well, I see the film and TV composition is not an area that I would have thought would have been drawn primarily to the Bitwig environment. But there you go.
Well, they always complain that we don't have video support, so...
Yes. Well, that makes it a bit hard. So, there's a question. Is that something that is a possibility, or is just not something that's really on the agenda at the moment?
Well, eventually, but we have a lot of different directions we could go. I mean, when we started the product, of course, it was quite a bit of a struggle to catch up with everyone else on the market that has been there for 10 to 20 years.
Yep, of course.
So there was a lot of things that we would need to do with each release to like, okay, we probably need to get a bit stronger in this area and in a different area. But now we started to notice that, okay, there are fewer of these areas left that we're really lacking if you compare to the more established products.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a lot of exciting stuff left, I think.
Yeah.
We're trying to keep it like a mixture of trying to break new grounds in different directions, and at the same time address issues that people have and what they might be missing from competing products.
Yeah, yeah. So and the product is stereo only. It doesn't have surround support, does it?
Yeah. If you want to do something else, then you need to like manually deal with it. But the tracks are always stereo.
Yeah. So no, I'm talking surround in mixing. Does it have surround support?
There's no surround panning and stuff like this. No.
Okay. So that, yeah. I mean, I wasn't really expecting that to be, but the composers, once they get their video engine, you know that they're going to ask for surround as well.
Exactly. So you might as well do both.
Well, yeah. There's no point, giving you, there's no point, but you will give them video, and if you do give them video, then I'll say, hey, how about the surround? And then after the surround, I'll say, hey, how about Atmos?
Yeah, I knew that was coming.
And you knew I was leading to that, didn't you, Pete?
Yeah.
So it's just, it is an interesting area that, look, my main core clients are generally large orchestral and film TV composers. And so these are the areas that I'm always dealing with. So the respective DAWs, if they're needing to move from DAW A to B, they're the questions I always get. Does it have surround support? Atmos is getting more and more focus. Is there a possibility of Atmos? And it is. It's getting further and further away from what we're actually discussing. But it is an area that I think moving forward is one that I'm going to be focusing on a bit. Not necessarily that the DAW builders, the developers all need to focus on surround or Atmos, but it is just, again, that's just a general thing that I'm hearing more and more chatter about. So it will be interesting moving forward with that one, I think.
Like you said, it's because companies like Netflix now require, is it Atmos or surround? I forget
Atmos.
which. They require one or both.
Atmos.
Yeah. And anything you submit to them.
Yeah, they've always had a surround type of requirement, but Atmos is the bigger one. And chatting to one of my clients this week, and Atmos came up again, and he said that where that is becoming more of a thing now is in game music sound and development.
Oh, yeah.
The gaming are now starting to embrace Atmos. So that could be something that, that could lead them towards one application or the other. And again, I've been asking, as many clients as I can about the importance of Atmos, and it's for the composers that do their own mixing is where it's going to be an important feature. But for those composers that are at a level where they'll do the composition and then the mixing is handed off to a third party, it's not as important. But we're starting to get sidetracked. So let's swing it back. Now, Claes, is there anything else that you'd like to chat about at all?
One thing that's a bit related to you is, I always had the idea that it would be interesting to have more benchmarking data from the DAW. So I was kind of like thinking about you. How would you like to see benchmarking implemented from a DAW? Let's say, should we do like a command line option where you can say, okay, play this project, give me the estimation of how many tracks I could play with a certain deadline? Or there are opportunities there to maybe make this testing automated in a way which it isn't.
I've had, and that's an interesting point, I've had a few people that have approached me over the years. There was one fella, and I've got the code somewhere, and it's all scripted, where he actually automated my whole DAWbench benchmark. And I watched it and almost fell off my chair. It was basically run the project, and it was sitting there turning the plugins on. And I went, wow. There's always has to be some human interaction as well, because the way that my DAWbench works is that there is always a human element in the sense that it's measured on when audio starts to break up, and then there's also there's a little bit of a wiggle room there as well. I don't know how you just run a simple automation thing, because unless you measure when the audio engine reports a dropout, you could do that, I suppose. That could be one way of doing it.
What you could do is, of course, time them. If you measure the time that you need in your callback, if you have a reliable timer from the operating system, you can then say that, okay, this is my timing window, and I can check how many tracks
I can run before it drops.
I make it.
Yep.
Or you can just make the test the other way around, that you say, okay, how much time do I need to render these many tracks, and what's like the peak time that I needed from a buffer?
Yes.
And yeah.
But
it would be interesting if this data was like easier to do, so that you could maybe get an idea of, okay, which CPU is actually good for this, or like how does changing something on my system affect it? Or for us, it would be interesting. Okay, we did a new version with a new optimization, and if we had this standardized benchmark, we could then see if it actually had an effect.
Well, you can definitely do that now with the DAWbench suite. I've over the years, at one point I had about 5 or 6 different DAWs in the suite, and then I started stripping them back, and then we ended up with 2, and now it's back to 1 for various reasons. But now I'm going to be building them back up. So I've already told Noel that I'm going to be building up a cakewalk session. I'm going to be doing a Bitwig session as well, and they are quite time consuming. But I'm committed to it now, so I'm going to be doing that. And look, it is a manual process, and it does take a little bit of time, but we can do that now with the current architecture. It's just not as automated, and so the difference would be that we're still using the human ear. We're going, okay, is that a dropout? It can be pretty obvious on some of them. Sometimes you kind of get these tiny little glitches, and that's the wiggle room that I'm talking about. But in most of these cases, there's an obvious break. You add one extra plugin, the whole thing just goes crunch. Or some extra polyphony, and the whole thing crunches.
Even in our automated test tools that we have, when people submit like glitch traces and stuff, there's somebody who actually listens for the glitch and then checks to see what was happening around that time.
Yeah,
so it's always a human ear.
Yeah, there is still a human element to it, but it is an interesting area. I didn't ever expect DAWbench to become some type of standard. It's kind of become a pseudo standard. No one else really has stepped up and done any of these sessions. There's been plenty of people complaining about it over the course of 15 plus years, and I always say, look, I'm open to suggestions, and you're more than welcome to develop something that, if you feel is better, let's do it. And I just still haven't. There's been a few other benchmarks with varying instruments and plugins and different approaches, and so where mine is actually the amount of polyphony or the amount or the exact number of plugins before the audio breaks up. What Claes was saying was how many tracks before it. That's the other approach, where they've got a predefined loaded track, with the set number of level of DSP, and then you just keep adding the track. It's similar, but it's a little bit different to the way that I've done it. How can it be automated? Look, I'm open to that, Claes. So if the first step is that I need to get my sessions across to the Bitwig environment, and then I think we can have some further discussion on that. But that I think that was a good question, Claes, because I think there is. I'm always open to finding different ways to actually benchmark the machines. At the moment, it's working, and it's working, and it's okay, but it's also highly dependent on the audio interface as well, So we have to have not only a standardized test, you have to have a level of standardized performance from the audio interface, which might be a little bit more difficult.
Either that or you need to remove it from the equation and just assume that you're just focusing on the CPU part of it.
Yeah.
I think that's your two options.
Yeah.
Which with Bitwig Studio you can do because you guys have a separate process, but most other ones, the GUI is kind of really, it can introduce things that you might not want.
Yeah. Well, in the discussion that I was having with Claes yesterday, and I won't bring it up here, but we were talking about another DAW and some GUI anomalies that I was witnessing in some of the later versions that weren't in the previous ones, just by scrolling, and I'm seeing spiking of in Task Manager and stuff, and there are other elements.
Probably the same one I'm looking at that's using software rendering instead of DirectX rendering.
Yes, we are talking about the same one, and but in the end, it's a difficult thing for me over the years to try and come up with a better process, because the other part of my DAW or my DAWbench work is the audio interface low latency performance database, and there's, as we've witnessed over the 50 plus interfaces that I've tested and done comparable head to head on, there's a huge variance between the driver performance of this stuff, and that's gonna be a direct end result to the end user. So they could get said CPU and still be using a lesser performing audio interface, and they're not going to get the performance that they're actually going to be expecting, because the audio interface is not allowing the machine to scale to where it should be. So,
but I still think it's an interesting idea to separate them out and have some level of benchmarking. And maybe it's not identical to what you're doing, but being able to quickly see if a system can run X tracks using Bitwig Studio on there, I think that's brilliant.
Yeah. No, this is definitely an area that I am open to, and we'll be having further discussions on this, Claes. And if you've got some ideas of how I should be building these sessions, please forward them, and then I'll put them all in a pot and see what we come up with at the other end.
Sure thing.
Alrighty. So I think, guys, I think we should put a pin in it right now, unless there's some other stuff that you guys want to cover.
Nah, I think we've covered the gamut. There's always the option to come back in the future and drill down into something. Yeah,
always, definitely. Take two, of course, right. Of course. All right, so I think we'll put a pin in it now. Thank you for both of you, for your time and energy today. That's been fantastic, and it was great hearing the insights into how Bitwig came about and some of its unique features. And if you guys want to sign off, that would be awesome, and then we can tidy it up at the end and finish up.
So thanks, Finn, for having me on again, and Claes, always great to talk with you and learn a bit more about the internals of what you're doing. So thanks so much for being on the show today. Yeah, thanks, Finn and Pete. It's great to be here, and maybe do it some other time. Who knows? Oh, no, definitely, Claes. We'll have you back again, guys. And thanks again, and thank you to everyone that's listened to this point. On to the next.